Hello, welcome to today's seminar, C4DISC, Advancing Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility in Scholarly Communications. I'm Melanie Dalachek, Executive Director of the Society for Scholarly Publishing, and I'm also a past convener and founding member of C4DISC. This seminar is part of a series celebrating SciELO's 25th anniversary, which culminates with the SciELO 25 Years International Conference in September 2023 in Sao Paulo. Please respect the SciELO Code of Conduct, which can be found at the link in the chat. And today's seminar is being recorded and will be available on the SciELO Network YouTube channel, and the slides will be available on the seminar page 25.scielo.org. Please feel free to drop questions in the chat, in the Q&A panel throughout the seminar. You can also chat amongst yourselves and with our panelists in the chat feature as well. We will hold the questions till the end. I'm joined today by fellow panelist, Demita Snow, Senior Manager of Publishing Technologies and DEIA Publishing Specialist at the American Society of Civil Engineers, Patty Baskin, Executive Editor, Neurology Journals, American Academy of Neurology, Chavi Chan, Director of Scientific Outreach, American Society for Investigative Pathology, and Simone Taylor, Publisher and Chief of Publishing Operations of the American Psychiatric Association. Today, you're going to learn about C4DISC's mission, how to get involved in the organization, and what resources are currently in development by the C4DISC working groups. I'm going to provide an overview of the current resources available on the C4DISC website. Demita is then going to do a little bit of deeper dive into the Toolkits for Equity, and Patty is going to speak about the Inclusive Language and Image Guidelines. Simone and Chavi from the Workplace Equity Project Working Group will discuss the past and current survey that aims to measure personal experiences of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the scholarly publishing workspaces. So I'll share my screen here. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen. Oh. You probably can't. Hold on just a second. Share screen. Okay. Now you should be able to see my screen. The Coalition for Diversity and Inclusion in Scholarly Communications was founded by 10 trade and professional associations that represent organizations and individuals working in scholarly communications. The coalition was formed to discuss and address issues of diversity and inclusion within our industry. A number of surveys in recent years have shed light on the lack of diversity in scholarly communications. From issues of gender equality to the noticeable lack of ethnic diversity in our workforce, there's an increasing awareness that as an industry, we are not a model of inclusivity. Publishing is truly a global enterprise, yet that diversity is not reflected in our collective demographics. Representatives from the 10 founding organizations first met in Boston, Massachusetts at the Society for Scholarly Publishing's annual meeting in 2017 to discuss our shared interests in addressing these challenges and to share information about current initiatives to tackle the lack of diversity and inclusion within the industry. We agreed to continue our discussions and collaborate on possible projects, starting with a joint statement of principles. Working collectively, we were able to combine our resources and have a greater impact. Since that time, we've formalized the coalition and developed the foundation for the work that we're doing now. The mission of C4DISC is to work with organizations and individuals to build equity, inclusion, diversity, and accessibility in scholarly communications. The vision of C4DISC is a socially just community that welcomes, values, and celebrates all who seek to contribute to scholarly communications. And our values include respecting through valuing differences and welcoming diverse perspectives, by listening to learn from different communities and make space for marginalized voices, and to act to eliminate barriers and to be an ally. Our overall goal is to increase diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in scholarly communications while valuing differences, welcoming diverse perspectives, learning from different communities, and making space for marginalized voices and while serving as allies. To that end, C4DISC is committed to eliminating barriers to participation, extending equitable opportunities across all stakeholders, ensuring that our practices and our policies promote equitable treatment and do not allow, condone, or result in discrimination, ensuring full participation in programs, policy formulation, and decision-making for all identity groups, raising awareness about career opportunities in our industry to groups who are currently underrepresented in the workforce, and supporting our members in achieving diversity and inclusion within their organizations. From its very inception of C4DISC, there was great interest in our community about how people and organizations could get involved or join or contribute to the valuable work that we set out to do. There are several ways that individuals and organizations can participate in making our community more inclusive, equitable, diverse, and accessible. In an attempt to focus our efforts and achieve maximum impact, formal membership in C4DISC is limited to consortial members that represent organizations and individuals who work in scholarly communications. Members appoint an official representative who will vote or otherwise participate in the governing body, which we refer to as the steering committee. Organizations whose business or work is related to scholarly communications and who wish to support the work of C4DISC can get involved and have a voice in C4DISC initiatives directly as partners. Examples include publishers of all kinds, libraries, industry suppliers, anyone that works in the area of publishing and scholarly publishing. The funds are used to support activities focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion in scholarly communications so that we can begin to find concrete solutions to these thorny and persistent problems in our community. We now have, skipped a couple of slides there. We now have 14 members and 24 partners. The support from our community has been encouraging, and it's a testament to the commitment that scholarly communications professionals are prepared to make in advancing DEIA issues. Individuals and organizations can also contribute to the work of C4DISC by volunteering their time through working groups. We are proud of the work that we have accomplished so far in creating a vision for future progress and have already created several working groups to engage in concrete actions that will improve DEIA and scholarly communications. The steering committee creates working groups to carry out C4DISC initiatives. Each working group has an appointed member liaison and a lead or two that sort of chair the group. And then individuals are invited to join via a general call for volunteers. Working groups are announced on our website and through our social media accounts. Any person interested in furthering the work of C4DISC can join a working group. You do not have to be employed by a member or a partner organization to get involved. If you would like to apply to participate in a working group, you simply complete and submit the online application on our website. We currently have 4 working groups in progress. They are the Communications and Outreach Working Group, the Toolkit for Disability Equity Working Group, the DEIA Community of Practice Working Group, and the Workplace Equity Survey Working Group. We'll be announcing new working groups later this year. The Toolkit for Disability Equity is wrapping up their work, and this new resource is expected to be available soon. The DEIA Community of Practice Working Group will host virtual discussions every other month that will combine time for open discussion with topical breakout sessions that are based on suggestions from participants ahead of the meeting. The Communications and Outreach Working Group develops press releases, articles, social media posts, presentations, and more to let our community know about the work that C4DISC is doing and to recruit additional members, partners, volunteers, and donors. As I mentioned before, we want to be the source that members and partners can rely on for accessing DEIA resources. On our website, you'll find that we regularly share DEIA-related articles and presentations, and both on the website and via Twitter. So be sure to follow us to receive those notifications. We host the Workplace Equity Survey results. We host webinars and provide an extensive list of DEIA resources, or excuse me, DEIA-related resources, such as recorded content, some paid, some free, that is available from our member organizations and our partners. And we host the various toolkits and other resources developed in coordination with C4DISC. My fellow panelists today are going to share a little bit more about each of the resources you see here to give you an idea of what they contain and how they're being used in our community. Our community has some important work to do, and it's encouraging that so many scholarly communications professionals want to be a part of making our ecosystem more equitable, inclusive, diverse, and accessible. The journey ahead of us is a long one, but we believe we can accelerate progress by joining together to tackle these issues and by collaborating to develop these shared resources, ideas, and solutions. Every individual and organization can make a difference. We invite you to join us in whatever way that you can to help us advance the collective mission of C4DISC and its members. So now I'm going to turn this over to Damita Snow to talk about the Toolkits for Equity.
All right. Hello, everyone. Just give me a moment to share my screen. All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Damita Snow. I'm the Senior Manager of Publishing Technologies and Publications, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Specialist at the American Society of Civil Engineers. I'm going to talk a bit about the Toolkits for Equity project and how it began. As Melanie mentioned, a few years ago, there was a growing awareness that scholarly publishing was not inclusive and that it needed to be addressed. Many believed that impactful change could be made if our associations and our organizations had training materials to assist them in the work to transform their organization's culture. The Toolkits for Equity project leaders, Nicole Coggins, Jocelyn Dawson, Melanie Dolachek, and Gisela Fassato, had been in conversation with individuals across scholarly publishing about the need for resources on how to initiate DEI work, how to replicate workplace equity groups, what to do in cases of discrimination and or microaggressions, and how to begin conversations related to race. To support this growing need for change, the project leaders submitted a proposal to the 2019 Triangle Scholarly Communications Institute to create 3 toolkits to provide resources for our community. One toolkit would be for allies, one for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC, and another for organizations. Following the model from the American Alliance on Museums' 3 guides for transgender inclusion, these toolkits provided a common framework for analysis, a shared vocabulary, and best practices to address racial disparities while focusing on the scholarly publishing community. The toolkits are published under a Creative Commons license. Therefore, you are free to copy and redistribute the material in any medium or format and remix, transform, and build upon the material. We do ask that if you are adapting or customizing the content, that you do not substantially dilute the language or alter the spirit in which the content was originally written. We expect that the toolkits will be customized to reflect your particular region, profession, etc. On the screen in front of each cover, you can see the table of contents. The Toolkit for Organizations table of contents is extensive. There were over 60 volunteers that worked on it, and it is the largest of the 3. I'll talk about each toolkit in the order in which they were released to the public, but first, let's define what an anti-racist is. An anti-racist is one who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. One who is expressing the idea that racial groups are equals and none needs developing, and is supporting policy that reduces racial inequity. The Anti-Racism Toolkit for Allies was created by a team led by Nicole Coggins, Jocelyn Dawson, Melanie Dolachek, and Gisela Fassato. It was released in August 2020. The toolkit written by a multiracial group of industry professionals, is intended for white people in order to help and guide the necessary work within organizations and communities. It provides an analysis of white advantage and information about how to disrupt racism and create work communities where everyone thrives. The intent is that it be a guide particularly for white people because white supremacy grants unearned advantages to whites. The work of recognizing these advantages and actively resisting racism is the most crucial work that white people can embrace to create meaningful change. Our industry, in terms of ethnicity, is predominantly white, somewhere between 79% and 91%, per the results of recent surveys from Lee and Low Books, Albert Greco, Robert Wharton, and Amy Brandt, Publishers Weekly, and Global Voices for Workplace Equity. The Allies Toolkit provides examples of what other organizations are doing to advance equity, inclusion, and diversity. It also paints a very sobering view of what life is like for many in the publishing industry. Racism is pervasive in scholarly publishing. While we can all think of exceptions to this statement, a recent survey of our industry shows that most Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC, in scholarly publishing experience both covert and overt racism at work. Please see the post on the Society for Scholarly Publishing's blog, The Scholarly Kitchen, titled "On Being Excluded: Testimonies by People of Color in Scholarly Publishing." It is well known that racism has an impact on the mental health of BIPOC professionals, as well as an impact on the career path of these individuals. As of this month, the Anti-Racism Toolkit for Allies has been viewed close to 19,000 times. In August 2021, the Anti-Racism Toolkit for Organizations was released. It was created by a multiracial global team of over 60 volunteers. The team was led by myself and Jocelyn Dawson. You will find that throughout the toolkit, we use the term Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and the acronym BIPOC to be as inclusive as possible. We have since become aware that the term people from the global majority is increasing in popularity. This toolkit is intended to help individuals at all levels within scholarly publishing organizations implement inclusive policies, procedures, and norms. It provides tools for understanding institutionalized racism, broadening hiring and recruiting, working to correct bias, including marginalized perspectives in decision-making, developing retention plans and a more inclusive pipeline, and creating affinity groups and mentorship programs. There are several key areas of focus: information on defining the path to become an anti-racist organization to supporting BIPOC staff can be found in the toolkit. Here are a few key takeaways. Leaders and managers will be able to create a structure for diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI work, measure progress, ensure that anti-racism work carries over into both distributed and co-located workforce environments, and assess how power and decision-making can be made more inclusive. Human resources departments will be able to broaden hiring and recruiting efforts, develop retention plans, establish equitable performance evaluation processes, and create employee resource groups and mentorship programs. Staff in all departments and at all levels will learn to recognize and address bias, be conscious of practices that may unfairly tax BIPOC, and will be ready to take part in or lead affinity groups and mentorship programs. There is also a comprehensive list of resources available for anyone looking for additional information on what their colleagues are working on or what has been successful in other industries. Just this month, the toolkit has been viewed close to 800 times, the highest views coming from the US and from as far away as Australia. The Anti-Racism Toolkit for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color was released in September of 2022. This toolkit is different from previously published toolkits, and although its access is not limited, it was created solely by BIPOC in publishing and is intended to be a resource primarily for BIPOC. The team that created this toolkit was led by Alejandra Mejia and Carrie Webb. It recently received an Excel Award for its design, created by Graphics, from Association Media and Publishing Associations Council, an organization whose members are association publishing and design professionals. In this toolkit, the contributors discuss issues BIPOC individuals commonly face while navigating the scholarly publishing ecosystem, provides critical reflections on building solidarity between BIPOC, and offers practical advice and resources for networking, navigating careers, building a support system, and prioritizing self-care. As BIPOC, we are not a monolith. We share diverse perspectives, intersectional identities, and experiences that are impacted differently by systems of oppression. The goal with this toolkit is not to paint our perspectives broadly, but rather to draw from personal experiences so that other BIPOC might be seen, to provide practical advice, and to share resources that we hope will help BIPOC staff not just survive, but thrive in academic publishing. In the last 6 months, the toolkit has been viewed close to, I'm so sorry, I'm not sure what happened with my slide there. But I'm going to stop sharing and just say that in the last 6 months, the toolkit has been viewed close to 600 times, the highest views coming from the US and from as far away as Finland and China. And now I'll turn it over to Patty Baskin. Thank you.
Can you all see my screen? All right. I am Patty Baskin. I'm, as Melanie mentioned, the executive editor of the Neurology family of journals, and I am this Council of Science Editors representative on the C4DISC steering committee. So you've heard about the toolkits now, and I'm just going to introduce the latest one that was published in October of last year. This would be the Inclusive Language and Imagery Guidelines for Scholarly Communications. I'll be touching on what these are, the intended audience, the content, how they were created, the various sections, and how we intend for them to be used. Whoops. There. Right. There we go. Can you see my, can everybody see my screen? It's okay. Stop me if you can't. All right. So the guidelines are a global tool. They're an educational resource and a living archive to help all authors, editors, and reviewers recognize the use of language and images that are inclusive and culturally sensitive. They address conscious and unconscious bias in published scholarly research. They aim to set industry standards that promote inclusive writing habits. They're a living archive updated over time that will link to current literature on the topic and other community-specific inclusive language guidelines. And they're a living archive that's updated over time. The documents, the guideline can be used at various steps of the scholarly publishing process. Authors can use them when they're preparing and writing their manuscripts for publication. Editors and reviewers can use them when assessing manuscripts at peer review to flag issues around tone, language, images, and suggest more inclusive alternatives. And they can also be used by publishers as a resource to ensure that their publishing content, processes, policies, and environment are inclusive and respectful, and by scientific associations and societies for language on websites, meetings, marketing materials, and in various ways where writing and communication is involved. They include 12 topical sections, including 10 language sections, with 2 separate sections for image and data visualization. Most of the sections includes a descriptive summary, recommendations of terminologies for use or to avoid, and links directing you to relevant literature, resources, and other existing guidelines. The plan is to update each of the sections annually with new recommendations, more references, and more resources. So here are the 10 language sections, and all of the sections emphasize that inclusive language acknowledges diversity, conveys respect to all people, and promotes equal opportunities. Tips that resonate across all these sections include using person-first language, only including details that are relevant, and being specific, allowing people to self-identify whenever possible, and considering whether anyone has been left out. Each of these sections contains tables recommending inclusive terminology and terms to avoid, and then their own specific reference sections. And then there are the two image sections that talk about inclusive images and data visualizations, and they show ways to intentionally include a variety of people and to portray people respectfully. In many cases, this means showing marginalized people in active, strong roles and not defaulting to showing those who have historically held power in society. They make recommendations for how to represent data by choosing colors, shapes, and words to help people connect with the data and to avoid amplifying biases. The guidelines also includes a resources section, which is the most living portion of the toolkit. It includes over 100 links to various resources such as tools, images, general language guidelines, and topical guidelines. As more guidelines are created by various communities, the list will serve as a living archive and an index to help users find current and relevant resources. The working group encourages the scholarly publishing community to suggest new resources to help grow the archive. We have committed to updating the guidelines so that they will stay current, and we're creating an ongoing work group to do this. And suggestions can be sent to C4DISC@gmail.com. I'm going to mention a couple of examples of language sections: age and race and ethnicity, and then the image section. But I don't have time to go through all 10 of the sections. But an example of a language section is age. Discrimination against older adults has received more research than other age categorizations, but it's not the only kind of ageism. Ageism includes adultism, which discounts children and teenagers. Ageism thrives on negative and inaccurate stereotypes. The guidelines suggest avoiding assumptions regarding age and stereotypes. Now, not every senior is senile and slow. The section discusses avoiding age discrimination by suggesting including age only when it's essential to the context. There's a long list of terms to avoid to prevent stereotyping and reframing aging and asking people to self-identify. And then on terms to use in formal research, for example, using specific age ranges. And then there's a section with references. This section begins with presenting definitions of race, ethnicity, and nationality that can't be determined by simply looking at people. It lays out that race is a social construct that describes people with similar physical characteristics. Ethnicity defines a group of people with a common history and culture, and nationality refers to the country someone belongs to. It discusses not mentioning race or ethnicity if it's not relevant, and what assumptions are made about people in a story. Not all Japanese American boys are good at math. It discusses avoiding generalizations in general and lumping large, diverse groups of people together. For example, using continents to describe people. Use Nigerian instead of African, using the specific term. Are terms capitalized as they should be? Many style guides are recommending both black and white begin with caps, although the AP style is not to capitalize white. And it's also important to note that what the community self-identifies as. It's best to ask what the preferred terms are, ask the community members, and then just being respectful. For example, don't use dehumanizing terms such as food words to describe the color of someone's skin or their appearance, for example, caramel or cocoa or chocolate. And next there is a table of terms and definitions. A number of those terms are shown here. The definitions column explains how the terms are used appropriately and sometimes exercises caution as they can vary in different countries. So remember that this is a global resource. For example, the term Aboriginal is used to mean different things in Australia and Canada, for instance. African American is not always synonymous with Black. It's best to use preferred tribal affiliations if they're available, rather than using American Indian or Native American. A Hawaiian is a person who is of Polynesian descent. You don't use it to refer to someone living in Hawaii. These are the kind of tips and definitions that are given. And then there are several terms a number of terms that is better to avoid if possible. For example, for Black, Asian, or even people of color or BIPOC, try to use and name the specific group instead. Avoid using the word minority to describe people. Be specific when possible. Don't use colored, although in some African countries, colored denotes those of mixed racial ancestry, and it is acceptable. The table covers a number of additional terms that you can see if you access the guidelines. So I highly suggest that you peruse it, because I don't have time for many examples. The references include the usual AMA Manual of Style and the American Psychological Association, but also specify specific style guidelines, including the style guides from the National Associations of Black Journalists and Hispanic journalists and Asian American journalists. And then some really specific ones, for instance, like the University of British Columbia's Indigenous Peoples Guideline. The inclusive images section intentionally includes a variety of people and seeks to portray people respectfully and disrupt stereotypes. There's a list of varying characteristics to include in images: age, race, gender, disability, hairstyle, skin tone. And then there's a list of image banks with images that show diversity and inclusion. Also included are a number of various aspects to consider. For instance, who's in a position of power in the image? What is the environment? And then, of course, there is a list of references. So how to use this toolkit and the others? They are training materials to help transform workplaces and organizational cultures. They're meant for educational use. They're not intended as legal advice. They're free to copy, distribute, reformat, build upon to reflect specific contexts and organizations. Commercial use is not allowed. I worked with our society to create a derivative language guide for the staff to use in our communications. It's more concise. It takes out a couple of the sessions. For instance, we really don't need immigration or religious terms. And it also added to some sections, for example, the health section, where we added neurologic terms that are used by our staff. Users may support the guidelines by using them in their organizations and work, promoting them at their own events, and most importantly, helping us to improve the guidelines. The guidelines will continue to expand and evolve along with our ever-changing language. So we invite you to join us in improving them. And now I am going to turn it over to Simone for the next presentation. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to Patty and the speakers that have gone before me. So I am going to talk about a C4DISC working group that Melanie mentioned that was chaired by Shavi and myself. I'll just share my screen. Can everyone see my screen? Okay.
Not yet, Simone.
Not yet. Thank you. Is that better? Oh. Can you see my screen now?
Nope, not yet.
Ah. Just a minute. Let's try this again.
There we go.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm Simone Taylor, and I'm just going to talk you through a work group on redoing the workplace equity survey that was first run in 2018. In 2018, given the scholarly publishing's historically large majority of females, as Demeter mentioned in the various statistical studies she cited, compared with a higher male majority in leadership, the Workplace Equity Project set out to try and understand what the drivers were, what the parameters were that defined the scholarly publishing landscape, understand the drivers for change, and recommend solutions for delivering improved outcomes. The study focused on a range of questions designed to capture data on individual experience and practice in the working environment, understand the features and attributes of the organizations that define the workplace, and identify the demographic composition of the global workforce. That survey got results from just under 1,200 people living across 6 continents. We have just closed the survey for 2023. That ran from the end of June to the 17th of July. And this time round, we had an increase of about 48% with just over 1,750 people responding from across 6 continents and 67 countries. So as the survey has just closed, we don't really have detailed analysis yet of the data that we hope to have by the beginning of next year. But in the meantime, there are a few things we can begin to point to, and a few things we can try to look for when we do the analysis based on the results we had first time round. So as I mentioned, we had an increase of about 48% with 1,750 voices responding this time round. Last time we noticed a predominance of respondents from North America and Europe, with Africa coming in at below 1%, Asia 7%, and South America 1%. This time round, early indications are that there are still a majority of respondents from North America and Europe, which isn't surprising given the shape of our industry. But those numbers are slightly lower than last time. So now we have about 61% North America, 26% Europe, 6% Asia. But we have increased the responses from South America at 6% and Africa 1%. And compared to the number of respondents last time to this question, where do you live, 845, this time we had more than 1,500 people responding to that question. Similarly, in the question, where were you born? Compared with 840 respondents last time, we have more than 1,400 answering the question this time round. And interestingly enough, the figures, while last time they indicated that people migrated from Africa, Asia, and Europe to South America and Australia, this time around, we find the numbers in South America relatively neutral. So 2% live there and 2% were born there. But we noticed that there is some migration from Asia and Africa into Europe and North America. So going to the key findings from 2018, Demeter has cited a few studies that give similar results to what we found then, that the workforce was predominantly female, predominantly white, predominantly heterosexual, with a high proportion of highly educated people. This time round, we tried to accommodate a range of options in trying to assess gender and sexuality and race. And the numbers seem to be a much better reflection. We still have a higher proportion of females at 72%, but now we have nearly 4% identifying as non-binary, which shows some progress in both the way we ask the questions, but also we hope in the freedom people feel in declaring non-normative, in quotes, gender assignment. We have 75% people identifying as white compared with 81% last time, and we seem to have achieved more representation from historically excluded groups than we did when the survey was first run. We also find that 15% of people report having a neurodivergent condition, 13% reporting a disability, and again indicates that respondents are more willing or feel safer in disclosing this information than we found previously. Now, a key finding from last time was the way that the workforce wasn't reflective demographically of the wider population, and the senior and executive leadership was even less so. So that even though we had some diversity in the workforce, it tended to decrease by the time you got to senior and executive leadership. So it was more male than the population, more white, less diverse, and with higher salaries. Looking forward to doing the analysis, what changes do we hope to find? Early indications are that some of the problems still persist, although people continue to report that they feel valued by the employer and they have a good working environment. There are some concerns about maintaining a work-life balance. There are specific criteria on what people might want to see when it comes to job satisfaction. But these are questions that we hope we can resolve once we get deeper into the analysis. We identified last time a pay gap, not just based on gender, but given the regions in which people lived and the demographics by which people identified themselves, either by gender and by ethnicity. There seemed to be regional pay gaps, so people in Northern America and more than their counterparts in, say, Africa and Europe and Asia, and people who identified as Black reported in the second lowest band that they earned money in the second lowest band, even though they predominantly lived in the highest paying region, North America. So it would be good to see what the results show this time round. Another key finding was that the proportion of women in the workforce declines with age and rank, whereas the proportion of men increased with age and rank. Men, we found then, were twice as likely as women to be in senior management or executive roles. We also found that respondents with characteristics more reflective of the leadership, i.e. less diverse, were more likely to report that they are fairly compensated, they are recognized by the leadership, and they have fair opportunities for advancement. So what can we do now?
Looks like maybe Simone has frozen. Yes. So Chavi, can you maybe take over? Is that possible?
I believe she's back. Simone,
Okay, there we go.
yeah. Simone,
Oh, you're muted now.
Oh,
now we can hear you.
Yes.
okay, so what happened? You lost me somehow?
You just froze up. So
Okay.
we can see you now. Your video is working again, but your slides are not being shared at the moment.
Okay, so let me do that. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Okay. So where did you lose me? Was I on this slide or was I on the slide previous?
Slide previous, you were just talking about the proportion of men and women in leadership roles.
Here.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. One of the key challenges we found last time was that even though the workforce was predominantly female, the proportion of women declines with age and rank, whereas with men, it was completely the reverse. And also men are twice as likely as women to be in those senior management positions. So it would be interesting to see what the survey shows this time round. And finally, we also found that respondents with characteristics more reflective of the leadership were more likely to feel that they were fairly compensated and recognized by the leadership and have fair opportunities for advancement. We also saw that people who identified as Black most strongly disagree that people of all ethnicities have equal opportunities for promotion. So what can we do now? Become a change agent. There are quite a few areas in which we feel that change can be achieved by just changing the way we practice and the way we work. So recruitment is one. Clearly, we need to have a more diverse workforce, a workforce that is more reflective of the general population. All the data that's been cited now shows that we haven't yet achieved that goal. How do we go about it? Well, we can try and expand the pool of people we recruit from. We can try and make sure we move beyond a requirement, say, for experience in scholarly publishing to get a job in scholarly publishing, because if you don't have enough people there in the first place, insisting on that requirement won't help you get more people in. Sponsorship and advocacy is something we found that was really limited and limiting for people without that advantage. So try to increase the sponsorship and advocacy for people who have been historically excluded from those types of partnerships. Create environments where staff do want to remain within the organization. The research shows that when we become aware of biases in our communities, we tend to want to train people to become more aware of implicit bias. That is a good thing because it makes us aware of where we might be failing, but it tends not to change the makeup of the workforce. What tends to achieve this, we have found, is that actually it's better to incentivize people to try and make sure that they bring change about. Also, in developing our partnerships and policies, now that in 2020, in the heart of the pandemic, many companies put out statements about their commitment to fighting racism and discrimination within the workforce. So this is an opportunity for us to do more of that and to also try to partner with people with like-minded policies. We look forward to exploring this more as we delve deeper into the data we've collected this time. So thank you for listening, and I'll now hand back to Melanie.
Thanks so much, Simone. And actually, if we could go and have all the panelists turn their cameras back on, that would be great, because we're going to have a few questions here. And I'm going to start with Simone, since it's we're just coming off of your presentation.
Okay.
We have a question for you. Looking at these findings on a greater scale can be really helpful for us to understand where we stand as an industry. Is there a way that we could use the survey results as an individual organization? For instance, how to turn them into actionable items for specific organizations?
So yes, of course. I think specific organizations can either try to map. I think whenever an organization wants to do this kind of change, it's much better to try and understand the composition of that particular organization relative to the rest of the workforce. And so getting a feel for either doing exactly the same survey or trying to understand what your own particular challenges are and framing questions around that so that you better understand those needs can be very helpful. Does that answer the question?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
All right. So this next question, I think we maybe each of you could answer in your own way. It's a little bit more of a general question, but what are some ways that non-decision making personnel can support the adoption and promotion of DEIA principles within their organizations? Anybody want to jump in on that first?
You know what? I can a little bit. I'll talk a little bit about my experience. Really short comment here. So there were some things that I wanted to initiate within ASCE. And what I did was find a few like-minded individuals. And we had sort of a, what I would call a grassroots kind of a little team. And then we grew as a committee. And that was a way to get some of the initiatives that we wanted to implement noticed. What we ended up doing was meeting, coming up with a mission, vision, and some of the goals that we had for this group and presenting them to our leadership. We were fortunate in that our leadership understood the need for these changes to occur, a need to reevaluate some things that we may have been doing. So I would certainly recommend that you talk to folks that have the same interest that you do in this regard, and you can definitely gain some traction. I wish you well.
I would just add something to what Danita already said, and what they essentially did was to create awareness, so I think it's good to talk about things that you think could be issues for yourself or others, and be the voice of those who are unable to speak for themselves. And once you create that awareness, more people would join your cause. And also, if the leadership, it was not something that was on leadership's radar, you can bring about these important concerns, highlight them so that some action can be taken by those who are in a position to change policies.
In our organization, we do have a committee of our members that is a DEI committee, but we did not have a staff committee per se. And because we had a DEI committee and it is espoused, DEI is espoused as one of our values, I found it pretty comfortable to go to our HR person and ask if we could set up a staff committee on DEI to help carry out that, their directives. And so we do have a staff committee going now, and I encourage people to join. And I was a chair of it for a while, and now I've rotated off, but and people join. And I think just for me also, one thing that's really nice is to be able to say, to tell people to go to the C4DISC website and see that the resources that we have, including passing on, for instance, the toolkit for organizations to our own HR department and pointing it out to them.
Yeah, those resources make it really easy to sort of both get some ideas personally in the toolkit for allies, but also that organizational toolkit is just a great conversation starter with those folks that are making decisions, and that they can see that this is an industry-wide effort and that your organization needs to be a part of that. Great. So maybe time for one more question here. Let's see. What guidance or tips could you give to someone starting to research accessibility and diversity in scholarly communication?
I will start with that one. I think something that CC mentioned, it's important to talk about the issues, because sometimes we can get tunnel visioned into whatever our own kind of particular interest might be. And I think what the findings show is that there are a range of parameters on which we can improve the response from others. There was a very interesting piece recently, I think it was in the Harvard Business Review, about the use of ableist language. We tend to use that generally without really thinking that it might be offensive or hurtful to people. Just saying, I've had a crazy day, or this is completely insane. These are words that are in general use in the lexicon, but may have specific meanings for people who identify with a mental illness or with a disability. So trying to be more aware of the different parameters and the different circumstances under which people work is a good place to start. And trying to get the perspective of those people is a way of finding solutions, rather than trying to define something that you feel might be applicable.
Excellent point, Simone. And I would like to encourage everyone to take advantage of all the extensive resources that C4DISC has already created. You know, it's a huge effort by a lot of volunteers, and a lot of resources are now at your disposal, which were previously, you know, missing for us to follow. So definitely leverage that.
I'm going to pick up one more question, and someone was asking, how did C4DISC come about and what's the biggest challenge so far? And I think you've all heard surveys mentioned a number of times, and the same ones that sort of were largely the catalyst for us sort of opening our eyes as an industry and saying, wow, you know, yes, we could have looked around and saw what was happening around us, but I think we are a data-driven industry, and I think that data was just sort of jarring, and it led the founding organizations that came together to make C4DISC sort of wake up and create DEIA task forces and committees, and we all realized that we were kind of doing the same work in the same community, and it made sense to come together and do that work together and sort of pool those resources, because we felt like we could get further faster. And I think from a challenge perspective, there are a lot of facets of diversity, inclusion, accessibility, equity. I mean, there's gender, there's race, there's disability and accessibility, and there's the workplace, and then there's the research environment and the public, so there's just so much that we could tackle. It's really, the challenge is prioritizing what gets done first, who's going to do that work, is there a champion for, a project, and so forth. So it still comes down to sort of resources and prioritization. But the idea is that really we're gonna get there faster by working together. So I believe we are out of time. So I want to thank our panelists today. I want to thank SciELO for inviting C4DISC to share a bit about its programs and resources. If you're interested in learning more about C4DISC, visit c4disc.org. Don't forget, these resources are free. They're available. You can adapt them. You can make them your own. You can, make them work for your organization as well. Just a reminder, the seminar was recorded. It's available on the SciELO Network YouTube channel, and that the slides will be available on the seminar page at 25.cielo.org. And then finally, just thanks for joining us and being a part of this today. And we hope that you have a great day.